So this video is Stop the Stigma, why it's important to talk about mental health. So, and this is another TED Talk. I admit I kind of like some of the TED Talks on it, but the subject. I hope you enjoy.
Consider that statistically speaking, you or one of those people that you just shook hands with will likely experience a mental illness at some point in your lifetime. 43.8 million adults experience mental illness every year. That's a high prevalence of mental illness. Yet, why is it something we're still afraid to talk about? In October, everything is pink for breast cancer. In November, men grow out all their facial hair for prostate cancer. It's a great excuse for this guy not to shave. We go to galas, we go to golf tournaments, we go to 5Ks, we go to fundraisers, and more for heart disease, cancer, and many other illnesses. And while all of these are important, we often forget or don't realize that mental illness is among the #1 cause of disability in our country, costing nearly $200 billion in lost wages annually. Depression, #1 cause of disability worldwide. Suicide rates continue to climb among adults, adolescents, and even children. Every year, we see the loss of celebrities and prominent figures to suicide. The opioid crisis continues to devastate our communities, costing over $100 billion annually. Yet, we're still not courageous enough to talk about mental illness. Why? Think back to shaking your neighbor's hand. Think about some of the first thoughts that came to mind. Great dress, cool shirt. Hope there isn't any more audience participation. Now, how did your thoughts change when I mentioned that one of you may experience a mental illness? Even for the most open-minded, judgment is a natural part of our human condition. However, when that judgment escalates to discrimination, prejudice, even hostility, it becomes a breeding ground for stigma. Stigma, defined as a mark of disgrace as a result of stereotypes and misunderstandings. In our society, mental illness is stigmatized more than any other illness or condition. We can see examples of stigma every single day, and we might not even realize what stigma looks like. Read the news. Turn on the news. Scroll through social media. Overhear a conversation on the street or at work. You are bound to hear an example of stigma. You might not even realize it. And those individuals that are stigmatized face barriers and obstacles to getting the help that they need. And it creates a bigger burden of untreated mental illness for our society and our healthcare resources. Now, some of this lies in a misunderstanding of psychiatric diagnoses. The brain, pretty cool, but very complicated. Modern science has still only just begun to understand how this works, let alone understanding what happens when there are issues with the brain functioning. There are many, many factors that contribute to the onset of mental illness: biological, environmental, social, genetic, stress, trauma. We still don't quite understand the interplay of all of these in our brain. Unlike back injuries, cancer, diabetes, we can't go get a scan, we can't go get an x-ray, we can't draw labs to diagnose mental illness. We can't see mental illness in the brain. Therefore, we have to rely on subjective reports and observations to get to a diagnosis. For many people in our society, this discounts the realness of mental illness. If you can't see it, it must not be real, right? This also leads to a lot of misunderstandings that people with mental illness can control it or snap out of it, or that those people who can't are weak or lazy or stupid or have other personality flaws. We would never have these expectations of somebody with a broken leg or cancer. Now, other stereotypes begin to form because of these misunderstandings. The main one is fear. We have seen mental illness become synonymous with danger, violence, instability, and aggression. This isn't what mental illness really looks like, yet this is the picture that's painted over and over again. News media sensationalizes violent events, often portraying those suspects as mentally ill, homicidal maniacs. Movies, television, social media, even video games all follow in line with these fearful representations of mental illness. How many movie villains have mental illness? Think about it. This leads our society to label and seek separation from individuals with mental illness, causing them to feel shunned, isolated, fueling their own self-stigma and shame about their condition. So, we also see this lead to issues with employment opportunities, housing options, and even relationships. And if these personal things aren't enough, we can see these false beliefs penetrate our legislature. We can see policies come out that put further barriers in place for people in need of help. Now, we also can see this happen in our healthcare system. Many medical providers and healthcare professionals have these same false beliefs, and these can carry over into the care that they provide patients with mental illness. So those patients might not get the diagnostic testing or the interventions or those referrals that they might need, because sometimes those medical providers think the symptoms are all in their head. And on a larger scale, sometimes we can see this stigma in the way that insurance companies cover or don't cover mental health care or psychiatric interventions. With barriers like that, it's no wonder that more than half of the adults that have mental illness never seek the treatment or care that they need. Now, here's the thing. Mental health care works. For every dollar that's invested in treating depression or anxiety, we can see a yield of $4 in health outcomes and ability to work. That's a pretty good investment. I don't do finances, but I probably would want my 401k to look like that. And people that do seek treatment for mental illness have good outcomes. They get good symptom management. We can even see remission. You may not even realize how many successful people in our society have or continue to battle mental illness. Now, there is a simple solution to breaking this cycle of stigma, at least the first step. If we as a community can talk about mental illness in a respectful and real way, we can start to break that cycle. Education about what mental illness is and what it isn't can challenge people's misconceptions and stereotypes. It can also begin to change people's misunderstandings. On a personal level, we can put aside our own prejudice and our own false beliefs and simply show empathy to those people and families that are dealing with mental illness. It doesn't take much. Now, if we, as a community, as a society, as individuals, can start to see people with mental illness as people rather than their diagnoses, we can take that first step to breaking that cycle. And we will also start to see that people with mental illness aren't any different than you and I. The first step is having that courageous conversation. So, isn't it time we stop the stigma? It may just start with a handshake. Thank you.